Hi, everybody. Not much time to record a snappy intro this week. The people behind me are a little upset. They think I'm dressed a little too fancy and look a little too rich. So I'm going to have to get out of here pretty quick. But today we're going to be looking at revolutions. We'll be looking specifically at a few revolutions that are covered extensively in the book. And then in the class meeting, we're going to be looking at some ones that aren't really touched upon that much. So in this video, you're going to see the Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution, as well as Napoleonic France. And then in class, we're going to be looking at Haiti, Mexican Revolution, and then or Mexican War for Independence. Excuse me. There's two different wars in Mexico, and then there's going to be the Latin American freedom battles for freedom. So that's what we're going to be doing. And like I said, I'm going to get out of here really quick later. Okay, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started here looking at the age of revolutions. Last time we talked about the loosening up of bonds between the colonies and the mother countries, and talked about some of the issues that had occurred that were leading to things becoming two separate worlds, basically. And this lecture here will look at what it is that permanently changes the way that colony and mother country operate. And so today we're going to be looking at a few revolutions. We're going to be looking at three revolutions here and then three different ones in class. And in case I have to not make it to class, I'll go ahead and record that one and send it to you guys as well. So here today, we're going to be looking at the Industrial Revolution. The early Industrial Revolution, and then we're going to be looking at the American Revolution, the colonial American Revolution from 1775 to 1783, and then the French Revolution of 1789. And then after the French Revolution, we'll be talking about Napoleonic Europe. So the way that these three will be broken up with is the first one will cover the Industrial Revolution. The second part will, or excuse me, the first part will cover the Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution, and then the second part will cover the French Revolution, and then the last part will cover Napoleonic Europe, and then Haiti, Mexico, and the Latin American colonies will be covered over in either in class or in the next video. So you can't really talk about the colonial break from the mother country without looking at the factors of the Industrial Revolution. There are really two main factors or two main philosophies that that really break the colonies away from their homeland. The first one we talked about last time, which was the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment thought about freedom and reason and logic began to take hold within the colonies. And the second one is going to be industrialization, creating easier ways to manufacture goods means that you can use less people to manufacture these goods. So colonies are no longer beholden to the mother country to create all of their goods that they buy, especially when you're looking at places that are under a moderate mercantile system where they're just trading the between the between the colony and mother country, then whenever you don't need to rely on the mother country, things begin to open up, and this is where the colonies really begin to basically stop crawling and start walking. And so we will go ahead and look at the Industrial Revolution in and its origins in Great Britain. The Industrial Revolution, I break it down into two different eras. The Industrial Revolution basically goes from the 1700s till about the end of the 1800s, so the 18th and 19th century. But this first industrial revolution really is what kicks things into gear. And this first industrial revolution is an improvement in agricultural practices. It's an improvement in the way that people cultivate food, that people can grow food, and that people can store food. And so these agricultural practices basically starts in England. They are separated from the mainland, and they have basically taken over the Atlantic. The mainland is having its own issues within itself, and so this leaves Great Britain to basically innovate and change the way that they practice agriculture. And these agriculture improvements are going to feed people at lower prices, which means that you don't need as much money to eat well. You don't need you don't need to spend a lot of money on food, and so you don't spend as much money on food. And so since you don't have to spend as much money on food, you now have the means to buy manufactured goods. You now have the means to buy better goods for yourself. So agriculture is not as time consuming or labor consuming, and so people have a chance to spend less money on food and more money on things that they want to spend on. And this also means that you have a surplus of labor, where people don't need to spend as much time, or they don't have to have the entire family working on a farm in order to make enough food. And so there's a lot of people that are looking for labor, and a lot of that labor goes to the cities and tries to make a living. A lot of the machines that are going to be found in very early factories are going to have very small parts, very narrow parts, and this is why women are going to be used in these factories, because they have smaller hands. They can get uh, they can go and stick their hands into looms or into presses and fix jams and get with their hands and pull things out of stuck things that are stuck. They can pull them out, and basically they won't crush their hands as much as men would. As time goes on, we'll start seeing that even that women are joined by children, but that will come at a later price. And so with this boom in manufactured goods, boom in agriculture, the colonial empire is becomes the outlet for manufactured goods. You have all of these factories springing up in England, and so they begin to spread the wealth out to the colonies. And really, by the middle of the 18th century, you're starting to see the rise of cities as the centers of the world in colonies, just as they are in England. But by that point, things have already changed so much. The ideas of freedom, and the ideas of land ownership, and the ideas uh, of logic, and all these uh, um, Enlightenment ideals have already really taken root in the colonies. And so the European manufacturers are sending things out thinking that this will make the cities much more compliant to the home country. But this doesn't. happen. Instead, the colonies are going to begin to learn how to create these ideas. They're going to learn how to produce these cheap goods on their own, and they're going to become less reliant on the mother country because they can manufacture their own goods, because they can buy things for pretty cheap. They have more money, they have more free time, and they are so far away from the mother country that it begins to make this idea that they have to be beholden to this country a lot harder for them to continue to buy into. And so, with these advancements in agricultural technology, you'll start seeing advancements elsewhere because the better agricultural methods you have, the more of a surplus of natural resources you'll have, and that only makes sense because you have a lot less waste. So, add that in with the labor, the excess labor that you have. You have a lot of people moving into the cities, a lot of people looking for ways to take advantage of this excess of natural resources, which leads to manufacturing advancements in things like textile production. You start seeing new inventions coming up, such as the flying shuttle, which is a new method of spooling cotton into these little ready-made cartridges that'll go into something like the spinning jenny here, which will basically spin faster and faster than normal people could at the time. So you're seeing a lot better and faster textile manufacturing, and so people are getting less costly material to make clothing. And then you have things like looms beginning to be powered by water. So the beginnings of using water and other resources to power these machines, so it's no longer just man powered. You start using water, and then after using water, then the next logical step is to begin to use steam and begin to create rotary engines. And rotary engines are first used for manufacturing, and then pretty quickly after this they're going to be used for moving things and moving engines. So this begins the manufacturing revolution in England. And so pretty soon you're going to see a lot of these technologies begin to be put together. You're going to start seeing all of these different ideas begin to come together and create something much more for lack of a better term, industrial. You're going to start seeing things like these giant looms that are going to take over factories. They're going to be cranking out fabrics by the yard full, just cranking things out, making it so much cheaper to buy clothing, much more cheaper to furnish your house and things like that. So the cost of creating things is going to go down a lot, and so the prices of these things are going to go down, and so a lot more people are going to be able to afford. You're going to start seeing a lot more money flowing into the British Isles, and this is going to lead to a lot of technological changes. You're going to start seeing the beginnings of the iron industry. You're going to start seeing much more mass-produced iron, and that's going to lead on later on, as we will see. So the iron industry begins to take hold in England. And then you also begin to see the creation of the industrial factory. You start seeing these factories go from a little more open aired out in the countryside, little warehouses, into these giant manufacturing centers within the cities. So technology brings about this new change in the economy, and this new change in the way that cities operate. This is going to begin to change the way that people act, and you start seeing this system of work discipline being instituted within these factories. You start seeing the owners of these factories and the owners of business begin push that Protestant work ethic, push this idea that work makes is what makes you you, that it is your work that says what you are as a person. So the harder of a worker you are, the more selfless of a worker you are, the more noble you are. And so they begin to put it into the mindset of this work discipline, not only this discipline to work hard every day, but also this discipline to not complain when things are going bad. And a lot of reasons why you can't complain is because you can be easily be replaced. Remember that labor surplus that we talked about. So the easier you are to replace, and the more that owners instill the fact that you are not a good person if you're not a hard worker, it leads to the beginnings of exploitation of workers. And so we're seeing technology change culture. Obviously, technology is going to change the economic factors, because the better technology you have, the usually the better the economic circumstances you'll find yourself in. But you're starting to see technology change the culture, change the way that people think, and pretty soon this advancing technology is going to change the social order. So you're going to start seeing this this industrial revolution begin to affect the social order, begin to affect the people in many more ways than just them having better economic opportunities. You're going to start seeing new economic patterns that go hand in hand with this change. You're going to start seeing more plentiful food. So this means that people can eat better. The price of food is going to go down. And so as people are eating better, you're seeing healthier people. You have this this technology is allowing for the for food to be eaten that wasn't be able to before by poorer people. So poorer people are eating a much more balanced diet, are eating a lot more protein in meats and poultry, beef, poultry, and fish, things like that. And so this is helping them work better. The more protein you have, the better fed you are, the more productive you can be. And so this creates a better, a more productive society. Textiles still are going to be the most important factors throughout Britain, and textile manufacturing is going to be the most important thing uh, in Europe, pretty much. But then in the colonies, you're going to start seeing a cottage industry. You're going to start seeing the beginnings of industrialization by the cottage industry rising up. And basically, the cottage industries are people in their cottages. Creating clothing or creating textile goods like this, using this better technology. So you're going to have better spindles, you're going to have better looming machines, and so people within their very own homes are going to be able to create small businesses that are able to, if not compete, then oftentimes undercut larger manufacturers, because you would rather trade with your neighbor or buy stuff from your neighbor than you would somewhere far off, miles away in a city. So this cottage industry becomes important in the new world, and then pretty soon after that, the cottage industry will be upended by the industrial factories being transported to the colonies. But overseas trade is going to boom. Europe has what's known as a consumer revolution, as the needs of the consumer upend the desires of the people that are selling. So the consumers aren't just going to take whatever is given to them. They're going to have opinions on what to buy and what they want. And if you can't give them what they want, they will go to someone else. And so the consumer becomes much more important than the seller. And so the sellers begin to travel more overseas to get things that people want. And so there's a lot more goods being traded back and forth from the Atlantic and even into the specific, exotic fruits, much more spices, and things like tobacco are sent over from the various colonies to the British Isles, and so and then also into Europe, and so these consumers begin to have much more choices, and they begin to exercise their rights to buy whatever they want. So in this case, you start seeing the countries move away from mercantilism and move into a much freer capitalist society, and this creates enormous prosperity, especially among businesses. However, not all are going to benefit, and we'll go more into this next week when we go into industrialization and nationalism, where not everyone is going to benefit from this boom in economic changes, and so you're going to have to um, and you're going to have to reconcile that with the advances in economic opportunities for those at the very top versus the economic opportunities those at the very bottom. And actually, we're actually going to talk about that in later on in this section as well. And so European society in the 18th century changes, in the 1700s, changes a little bit, but society pretty much is still determined by heredity. The peasants are going to be the largest social group, while at the top, the nobles are still going to be the ones dominating. You have a little bit of mobility in the class, in the merchant class and the artisan class, but for the most part, the pillars of society and the bottom of society is not going to change very much. You have the persistence of nobility versus peasantry, which is not going to change at all, and the industrial town, the townspeople are still a distinct minority. But within this town, you start seeing the changes in society much more than you do see in the rural lands. So the towns are where European society is really going to change in the 1700s. You're going to see within a town patrician oligarchies that basically control city by city. You're going to see a lot of wealthy rentiers that are going to control the land. You know, they are literally landlords. They own the land, and they control the people that live on that land. You start seeing the beginning of a middle class, but more of a lower middle class. A lot of the people that become middle class are going to move out into the countryside away from the city. They'll do all their business in the city, but you're going to see a lot of the upper class moving out of the city. And so, in really the people that actually live within the most cluttered part of the cities are the lower middle class and then laborers and working class. The rentiers, the noblemen, oligarchs, uh, large, more successful merchants are going to live away from it. You know, it's not really the suburbs as we know it, but it is sort of living away from your working center, and you're just going to have people in charge of the people that actually work for you, and so the city becomes much more much more diverse as far as the people working in it. You're going to see people from all over the British Isles begin to move into the city. In mainland Europe, you're going to see people from all over the different kingdoms and countries begin to move into the city. So in that sense, the towns will become much more diverse. But as far as economically, and even even racially and nationally, it's not going to be very diverse. It's just going to be a lot of poor people being packed into the cities. So European society begins to change a little bit in the 1700s, but it's not going to be a big a sea change as you're going to see later on in the Industrial Revolution. So that was the first of the revolutions that we're going to be looking at today, the Industrial Revolution, the early Industrial Revolution. We'll go back in and look at the broader industrial revolution as it spreads out from England it becomes the manufacturing revolution that we know of. But now we're going to be stepping off to the side, looking at the military revolutions, or the armed revolutions that we are now upon in this time in history. We're going to be looking first at the one that most people are familiar with here, and that is the American Revolution. And this one is, it's pretty much pretty covered ground as far as people here go. But I'm going to try to add some things that are often missed in the tellings of the American Revolution. So the reason why you start seeing the split from the colonies, the American colonies in England, is starts with the British having very loose control over the colonies. They let the colonies operate on their own. Remember, they sent over the undesirables. They didn't really spend a lot of time trying to set these colonies up. They left them off on their own for a good number of years, and then of course you have all the wars in Europe and the political unrest, the English Civil War, the Restoration, the Glorious Revolution. All those political upheavals take the focus away from the colonies, and so because of this, the British don't have the same type of control that the Spanish have. You have a governor that controls colonies, but they don't have the same power as the viceroy in the Spanish colonies. You have instead more a much more aligned version of the parliamentary system in these colonies. So the governor will be appointed the um, by the by the king or the king's representatives, but there will also be a political assembly in these colonies, and these political assemblies will be made of prominent colonists or businessmen, and they will have a vested interest in making sure that the colonies operate well. And then you know the main power is just like Parliament controls the purse in England. The Assembly actually pays the governor's salary, so governors need to make sure that they stay on the good side of the Assembly so that they can get paid, but they also have to stay on the good side of the government, of the British government, in order for them to keep their position. So they have to walk much more of a tightrope than the Spanish viceroy, who can do whatever they want. Um, and so that begins to change things in the New World, as the king has much smaller influence on the colonies. You start seeing the assemblies have much more power within the colonial structure. Another key difference between Europe and the colonies that causes a lot of change is that only landowners are allowed to vote. For things like political assemblies, or for to be represented in government and things like that. And that is made very restrictive in England, because the amount of people that can vote, that can actually own land in England, is much smaller than the ones than in the colonies. In the colonies, you have a lot more colonists owning land. That was one of the reasons. That was one of the things that they used to entice colonists to come over, was the ability to own land. And it's a stark difference. In England, you only had about 5% of the population owning land, or the white males owning land, where in the colonies, 75% of the eligible colonists could did own land, and that means that they could vote. So you have a broader voting base, and so you have to make people happy. Um, you have to create a system that benefits them over a system that benefits the rich or benefits the crown. And so that begins to change the base of people that can actually vote. And then pretty soon here come the Enlightenment ideals. The Enlightenment comes to the colonies and takes hold very quickly. One of the reasons why it takes hold is because education is important, not only being able to read the Bible, but also being able to read philosophy, be able to be good in math and science and things like that, being a well-rounded student, not being like the dunce in the corner back there. You never want to be like that. And so education became very important in the colonies to mainly to fight the stereotypes of being uneducated. People like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin really fought hard to keep this idea of colonists just being backwards bumpkins away. They didn't really want that to be the way that they were seen, and so they really tried hard to change that stereotype. And then there was this ideal of equality. The ideal of equality is much more attainable in the colonies. In England, because you are often under the thumb of a landlord. 95% of the voting population or possible voting population was. You really couldn't move up in society. However, in the colonies, if you moved out and started a settlement, or if you were able to work hard or work with ingenuity and make it rich, you could actually be somebody. So this idea of equality, this idea that all men have some sort of equal nature within them, is a lot more attainable in the colonies, just as long as you don't tell the natives or the slaves. So you have the continuing evolution of the colonies by everything that we've just talked about. And everything comes to a head in the 1760s. By 1763, you have the end of the French and Indian War, what's known here in the Americas, or the 7 Years' War in Europe. And after this, you have the British Crown really needing to raise revenue for troops that are stationed in the Americas, and so in 1765 you're going to see them pass the Stamp Act. And what this is the first of many direct taxes on the colonies. From 1607 up until 1765, the colonists had not really paid taxes on many goods that were brought over from Europe. They had paid duties from on some of the goods that were coming over, but because the resources were so plentiful and the manufactured goods were flowing to the colonies, they were able to buy them. It never really needed to be levied a tax on them, even though the British Crown was spending a lot of money in defense of the colonies and in trade with the colonies. They never really needed um, to raise any sort of revenue from the colonies because they were making so much money from the natural resources. So here in this Stamp Act, basically it says that colonists can only buy stamped paper from the stamped paper goods from England. So it was all in a special embossed stamped paper. So it was newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, anything that was paper, books that had this stamp on them, and so that they had to pay extra money from that, to pay a tax. And this was the first direct tax on the colonies. But what really made the colonists mad is that this idea of no taxation without representation. The idea was that that there was no direct representative of the colonies in Parliament, and so they didn't feel that this was a proper tax because um, because um, this notion of no taxation without representation was so prevalent in the colonies. We have nobody speaking for us. So why are you imposing taxes on us? And so this begins to get people angry, and there begins to be you know basically throwing rocks um, at military police stationed in the cities, violence and destruction of property throughout the colonies, and it starts to get ugly pretty quick. And the British basically say, "Well, colonists don't pay their share of defense. They've never paid for the soldiers that are stationed in the colonies. You know, the British Crown has paid for all of this, and so you have basically said that this is we've basically said this is all free, so now you have to pay what's due." And so this goes back and forth, and basically violence erupts in 1765. You have things like the burning of effigies in Boston. You have the you have the beginnings of riots in the streets, and the imposing of curfews, things like that. And so it really begins to turn ugly really quick. So you can see that, in 1765, with automatically um, being impose this tax, that pretty quick you start seeing violence in the streets. It means that the colonies and Britain have really split, and they really have nothing in common really anymore. So in 1766, you actually have the repeal of the Stamp Act. Cooler heads prevail, and the and Parliament actually repeals it, but says, we can impose taxes at any time that we want to. You are virtually represented by the fact that uh, you are loyal and in good standing citizens in good standing of the British Crown. So, because Parliament represents the people, you're part of the people. We represent you, and this doesn't really go over well, and doesn't go over well afterwards uh, when Parliament passes the Townshend Acts. And these Townshend Acts are going to basically uh, are going to pass more taxes that are there to raise the revenue and create uh, better regulation of the markets, and punish um, some colonies that have rebelled against the government, haven't been paying their dues, their due taxes. And so these Townsend Acts, there's five of them. The New York Restraining Act, the Revenue Act, the Indemnity Act, the Commissioners of Customs Act, and the Vice Admiralty Court Act. And these combined Townsend Acts are going to lead to even greater um, uh, struggle between the colonists and the British. You're going to get violence in Boston, as per usual, and the British Crown is going to send in 4,000 troops, and the 4,000 troops are going to be met by protesters, and you're going to see um, the beginning of the propaganda machine that is the colonies, as in this Boston massacre. You have five people killed in the streets of Boston uh, by British forces, and pretty soon this news goes throughout newspapers throughout the world, and it begins to see that Britain is not only facing a a tough task in quelling the colonial forces. They're also having to face a PR war, as they are no longer have any sort of moral high ground against anyone else. And the enemies of Britain, who are very numerous, are going to be spreading the information about Boston Massacre, and the reason for this is going to be pretty clear later on, which we'll get to. So by 1770, you have the repealing of the Townshend Acts, and the no longer have taxes on goods that they're going through. They don't have protections for trade except for one item, tea. And so you have tea still being taxed and very heavily regulated by Britain at this time. And one of the reasons why is that at this point, they are going all in on India, and one of the big export goods from India is tea, and they are trying to protect the tea trade as much as possible. And this is going to end up leading to the Boston Tea Party with the Tea Act of 1773 that basically cuts all levies and tariffs of the East India Company. They no longer, the East India tea is the only tea that you can get uh, throughout the throughout the colonies. This is going to undercut colonial importers. They're going to have to eat the cost of these teas, and this is seen as another one of the many many acts that the government that the British government is imposing upon the people. The colonists are incensed, and they basically hold the tea ships in Boston Harbor. And dump the tea into the ocean. They disguise themselves as Native Americans, dress up as Native Americans so that they won't be recognized, and dump tea into the ocean. And from there on out, Americans don't really drink tea. They're more about coffee. And so this Boston Tea Party is going to lead to the coercive or intolerable acts. It's called coercive acts in England and intolerable acts here in the United States. You have the Boston Port Act, which closes the port of Boston, the Massachusetts Government Act, which takes the autonomy of the Massachusetts government away, the Administration of Justice Act, which basically says that people can be tried in England. Protesters can be tried in England instead of here in the colonies, and so that's part of this. Getting them away from biased juries. And then you have the Quartering Act, which basically says that the British Crown can quarter soldiers in anyone's house as they see fit. And so this basically is where it's no turning back. In 1774, a year after the Tea Act and the Intolerable Acts, you see the First Continental Congress, and this First Continental Congress wants to maintain the ties to England. They don't want to gain independence. They want representation of themselves in Parliament, or some sort of parliamentary access, and so they draw up this plan of union. It's sent to the to Parliament and to the King, and the King basically says no. There is a counteroffer that is brought up by some of Parliament members that are sympathetic to the colonial cause. Because this is one thing that you should note, is that not everyone in Parliament hated the colonists or didn't want them to have some sort of freedom, wanted to crush them under their boots. There were a lot of people in Parliament that were supportive of the colonists, and had this idea that, yeah, they should have a lot more representation. We need to keep them happy because they are important members of of our society, and so but they are outnumbered by the much more conservative hardliners that say no, they are colonists and they're going to do what they're told. And This olive branch proposal that comes from those sympathetics basically says, well, why don't the colonies set up their own mini parliament in the colonies, and though they can meet and draw up these ideas to send to us, and we can say then we could vote on them. So basically this is the way that Canada operates for a long time after before they get their um, before they have basic independence. This olive branch proposal doesn't really gain any traction, and pretty soon it's clear that there's going to be war. In 1775, you have the first shots of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord, and pretty soon after this, King George III creates the Proclamation of Rebellion that basically says that anybody um, in rebellion or aiding rebellion is guilty of treason and will be executed. And a lot of people are against this because they feel that they could still stop any sort of war by saying, well, if you just stop, we can just go back to square one. Just start all over and allow cooler heads to prevail. But George III says, no, if you even harbor any rebels, then you are guilty of treason and you will be executed. And this basically means that there is no way that they're going to reconcile without any bloodshed, any further bloodshed. And so the Second Continental Congress then meets in 1775, and by 1776 they will begin the move towards independence. And so this move towards independence um, leads to a full scale war. And pretty early in the war, England actually has a disadvantage. Number one, they're in unfamiliar territory, uh, but they also have a lot of communication issues. So the colonists, if they had been a much more ready to fight, they could have basically won this pretty quickly. The British Army comes in not knowing the land. Colonists have been living there for over 150 years. They have trouble communicating, and then the biggest problem is that the British are wearing these red coats, and the red coats stick out pretty clearly um, in the very green, and then later autumnal, and then white forests of New England. And so the redcoats are basically a huge target on the British soldiers, and the colonial fighters are able to take them out because they stick out so much. However, the colonial fighters have their own issues. They're a very untrained army that they are good hunters and good and pretty good sharpshooters, but that doesn't really mean much when you're fighting against a well trained military, because shooting in perfect stillness and quietness of hunting is different than the chaos of war. And the colonists pretty soon find that it's a different sort of shooting and different sort of thing to fight in a war. This becomes a war of attrition. So the fact that the British have more troops is basically means that they will have more people left by the time the shooting ends. And so the colonists not being able to end the fight quickly means that they are on the end of a losing battle. And then, of course, you have the Native Americans that that are there to help the British, because the British say, well, if you help us, then we will make sure that the colonists don't continue to encroach on your lands. And so the Native Americans will believe the British and will ally with them against the Americans. And basically, the best in the early parts of the war, the best that the colonists can hope for is a stalemate. Um, they really don't have um, any way to truly defeat the British. Basically calling a truce is going to be the best outcome for them, except you have the changing tides that are going to happen pretty quickly. And here's where a lot of American history basically says that, well, the Americans rally around George Washington, and everybody win, and the Americans win, and the British leave, and everybody's happy. What actually happens is a lot more complex. The colonists are on the verge of losing the war. The British have surrounded them. The British are constantly defeating them, and the British are beginning to use much more hardline tactics, and the colonists um, have no real chance of losing, except Europe is going to come in. You're going to start seeing outside help. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson have been in Paris, have been trying to get the French and other forces to accept them as a sovereign nation. And if they are accepted as a sovereign nation, they can sign treaties, and they can bring in help from the outside. Remember, the English have made many enemies, especially as recently as 1763, when they cut everybody else out of the treaty signing after the 7 Years' War. And so it's going to be the French that are going to be the first to help um, uh, stem the tide. You're going to see them signing the Treaty of Alliance, which basically brings in hundreds and thousands uh, of French forces to fight with the American colonists against the British, and they will be led by Gilbert du Motier, the Marquis de Lafayette, and basically every large city on the East Coast. Many of the cities throughout the United States have a street named Lafayette, or Lafayette Square, or some sort of Lafayette, and they are all named after Gilbert du Motier, the Marquis de Lafayette. And the Marquis of Lafayette is actually going to turn the army around. He's basically going to write the book on how to be an American soldier. He's going to train the army. He's going to become best friends with the with George Washington. Lafayette actually names his son George Washington de Motier, Marquis of Lafayette. So he becomes best bros with George Washington, and so by turning the army around into a instead of a guerrilla warfare outfit, and turning them into a uh, fighting force that can beat the British at their own game, you really see the war changing right there. Uh, when you see we talked about this in the Ming dynasty as well, where the Red Turbans, once they became an actual military force, they were able to defeat the Mongols, and this is the way that happens here as well. On the other side, you actually have German mercenaries that fight with the British and come over into the Americas, and uh, begin to try to turn the tide, so that the Prussian and Austrian mercenaries, known as Hessians, are going to be fighting against the colonists. And actually, after the war, a lot of these German mercenaries are going to be like, "I actually like this place," and they're going to move into places like Pennsylvania, and move further into the Ohio River Valley, and then continue to push on. And they will be some of the first of the German speaking people that will move into what is now the Midwest, and then they will be met later on by other German immigrants, and they will create basically the Midwest of the United States. So these German mercenaries are going to be the first Midwestern Americans, and actually they are pretty not well liked after the war, which is why they move away from the East Coast. They really like living in the Americas, but they're not really welcome. And actually, I think Benjamin Franklin completely distrusts Germans, and he wants them eradicated uh, from the uh, um, from the Americas, but cooler heads prevail as they should, and so the German peoples move into the Midwest, and here we are, 2020. They gave us pretzels and really good beer. Um, so outside of those two, you have also the Spanish and the Dutch joining the war against the British. The Spanish and the Dutch will, in 1779 and 1780, respectfully, declare war against on England and begin to fight in India and the Caribbean. The Spanish will take some islands in the Caribbean, as will the French, while the Dutch will try to raise banners against the English and ally with some of the natives in Indians in India, and try to take control of some of the land in India. And so because India is so important, the British will turn all their attention to India. And if it had not been for the French, Spanish, and Dutch um, basically joining the American colonies and taking revenge on the British, the American colonists would probably very well have lost the war. But because England is losing land in the Caribbean, and most importantly, losing land in India, they can't stand for that, and so they're going to basically abandon the war by 1781. And by 1782, you're going to see the beginning of the signing of the Peace of Paris. And this is one of my favorite paintings here, because the this is the signing of the peace, and the British diplomats did not want to stick around to sit and for the painting, and so this is an incomplete painting, as only the American diplomats were there uh, signing the peace treaties, and the British were just not there. I can't remember who drew this one, but it's the same one who drew the unfinished George Washington portrait as well. And Washington there in this portrait looks very, very uh, annoyed, the fact that he's sitting there, and then the British just gone. I just love this painting. It's so petty. Um, so this Peace of Paris allows the American colonies to retain their to attain their freedom. Spain is going to get Florida back. The Loyalists are going to flee to Canada, and actually going into Canada. This is a huge turning point for them, because they're basically kicked off their lands simply for being loyal to the British Crown, and this is going to be a formative event in Canadian history, as begins where the Canadians say that we're not going to be American, we're not going to be Americans, basically, and it actually leads to their independence later on, as they begin to set up their own systems, and instead of fighting for war, they're going um, to create their own system, and demand to be given freedom, and eventually attain that freedom somewhat. Native Americans, however, going to suffer greatly, as they were promised um, to have the protection of the British Crown, but in the Peace of Paris, the British government is basically going to abandon Native Americans, and the American colonists will continue to push into their lands and will actually push through with vengeance because they feel that the Native Americans are their enemies. The Native Americans are not to be trusted, and so they begin to push the natives out further and further. And so the story after this is that the United States is created. Uh, Fast forward to 1789, where you have the ratification of the Constitution, and everything's hunky dory. Where actually the United States creates a loose confederation similar to Prussia or similar really to the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And this loose confederation almost collapses pretty soon afterwards. In 1784, you have the final peace and the Articles of Confederation are signed, and you have this jumbled mess of colonies and territories that each can control their own currency, their own laws. There is no uniformity throughout, and it is these United States are on the verge of collapsing. You could have seen a country of Virginia, a country of Massachusetts, this large lands of the Carolinas together, and they were on the verge of fighting against one another until the Constitutional Convention comes in, solidifies the new country, and begins their march westward. And it is going to take pretty soon. After 1792, the United States becomes a part of world affairs. After 1792, you start seeing them trading with England and trading with France and other countries in Europe, and you start seeing this um, actual movement in the United States to become the beginnings of a world power. They're still not a world power yet, but they're starting to push that forward. So the colonial victory eventually will lead to bigger and better things. But by the end of the war, up until 1792, it doesn't seem like the United States is even going to exist into the 19th century for it to become so important. But that is exactly what happens. And so this is where we'll leave the United States, and we will come back to this in um, in the coming weeks. But here we will move to um, the next revolution here.